I'm Rebecca Kemp Brent. I love antique and vintage needlework and I use it for a lot of inspiration, but I also enjoy putting a fresh twist on things and coming up with 21st century ways to do the things that I enjoy. So for this project, I started with a very traditional quilting design, a patchwork design, that's a hexagon star made from 12 diamonds that are all the same size and shape. And I decided to put the twist on it of using these shapes as appliques instead of piecing them together. This particular pattern takes Y seams, which really are not as hard as you think they are, but by using them as appliques, I don't have to worry about seaming them at all. So I came up with this quilt design that's sort of a freewheeling, unconstructed way of using the diamonds and maybe just a hint of the star. To start out with, we have this traditional star, and I've drawn it off here. So again, you can see that all of these diamonds are the same shape, and I've put it inside a rectangle because it's going to be important later to understand that this is not a square shape. It fits inside a rectangle instead of a square. I used this in one of my quilting programs to develop a design that could actually be followed for a quilting pattern. And the idea is that you want to have as straight a path as you can so that you don't loop back over yourself too often, so you don't have double stitching or a lot of extra in your path. And one of the first things that I realized is that these two diamonds on the sides were going to overlap when I put this side by side. So I compensated by just deleting those, and I wound up instead with this sort of figure 8 pattern. You'll see it's still a rectangle, but now it's a vertical rectangle instead of a horizontal one. And when I actually take this to my software, I'm going to convert it to a square. I'll show you that in just a second, but this is a visual that I think helps to explain what I'm talking about, because you can see the original here shaded, and when I squish it down to make it into a 6" by 6" square, you can see how the outline changes just a bit. And the reason this is important is that when I'm using the squared off shape, my diamonds aren't all the same size and shape anymore. So I'm going to show you how I use 3 different diamonds when I put the quilt together. Now let's go over to the computer for just a minute so that I can show you how fun and how simple it is to arrange a quilt with a computer program. I'm going to use this particular part of my software, and I can use the pattern making part first, which is what I did. I took my drawings in and I created a pattern that I have saved on my computer. You'll recognize this figure 8 shape as the one that I designed from my artwork. Now I'm going to select all of the blocks in my quilt and place the pattern in each of them. Easy as pie. Of course, that's not quite the look that I wanted, so I need to make them large enough to fill my blocks. We're going to use the maximum width and the maximum height, and just like that, I have a quilting design that I can take to my quilting machine, and it will stitch out the grid for me. But you know, it's a very regular grid, and I guess I was really feeling adventurous that day. I decided this was a little bit too straight for me, so instead I am going to go in and choose every other block. I have some nifty little shortcuts here that let me do that, and then choose the alternate, and then I want to rotate those designs. Now that's a little bit more interesting. So I have my quilt design all ready, and I will go down to the button that says Quilt, and when I click that, then this is going to transfer my design into the information that the machine needs to make the quilt. And I'm demonstrating it here for you on my laptop because that was an easy way to kind of give you a little bigger surface and show you what I'm doing. But now I'm going to go to my quilting frame, where you'll notice that I have a tablet computer running the same software, and it's that tablet that's going to control the machine's movements and help me stitch this out on my quilt. Okay, now I'm at my quilting frame and I have my quilt design on the tablet computer. It's mounted right on the sewing machine, and honestly you can do all of your design work here. It was just a little easier to show it on the laptop computer. But this is exactly the same software, the same design that I showed you a minute ago. And I have it situated. The software knows that I can only stitch one row at a time, so it's accommodating that. And then it will also tell me exactly how I need to place the fabric in the frame as I go forward. We're just about ready to start. The first thing that I want to do is to pull up my bobbin thread. And the machine gives me these little reminders about making sure that the needle's up from time to time, which you can turn off, but I actually like to keep those because I'd rather do that than accidentally make a mess with something. So now I have pulled up the bobbin and I moved the foot over to the side so that I can grasp both of those threads. And then we're ready to touch the magic sew button, and here we go. One more reminder about the needle. The machine will start by stitching the tie-off stitches just to make sure that my ends are secure. And because I alternated every other one of my patterns, it's going to sew this as a block by block design instead of as a continuous line. So it will pause at the end of the first block. You can either cut off the thread tails that you have close to the quilt top, or you can just leave them over to the side, which then lets you go back and take a needle and thread later and actually work them in between the layers of your quilt for the most secure finish. When I'm deciding whether or not I need to do the handwork to finish them, I think about what I'm going to do with the quilt. And if it's a wall quilt like this one that's probably not going to get a lot of wear and tear, I may choose to go the easy route and just clip the threads close to the quilt top. This is where the little bit of pre-engineering that I did comes in, where I've tried to use an economy so that I don't go over the lines over and over again. And now you can see I've finished my first figure 8 pattern, and the machine ties off again, and then it will stop, and all I have to do is give it the commands on screen to move to the next area. And because I have this still tied off, because it did the tie off at the end of the first block, I don't actually have to pull my bobbin up again. So I can just start sewing. And the machine begins with another tie off and carries on all the way across the row and then all the way down the quilt. Now let's go back over to the table while the machine is sewing, and I'll show you a little bit about how I prepared the appliques for my quilt. Okay, so now I have another piece of software that I'm going to use along with my electronic cutter. And there are a lot of things I can do right on the machine, but I can do a little bit more with the software that goes with it, so I'll use that. And you remember I showed you this earlier. This is sort of the abbreviated star design, and this is the one that has been squeezed a little so that it fits into a square. And I have now 3 different diamonds that make up my design. And you don't need to use all of these when you're cutting diamonds for your quilt, but you'll need number 1, which I think of as a vertical, and then I've got a horizontal, and then just because it's not all exactly the same shape anymore, now I need to reverse that horizontal as well. So in my computer, in the drawing software, or again, you can do this with paper and pencil too, I've traced off just those 3 diamonds, and these are the same size as what I quilted on my background fabric. Okay, now one thing I've found when I'm using the software and my cutter is that these diamonds tend to work a little better if I put a fill in them. That was the gray area that you saw, and you'll see here that there's no longer any gray fill to these, but it just helps the program recognize them when it's opening the file. So what I want to do is make these a little smaller so that I have, if you look back at the quilt for a minute, you can see that there's sort of a gray framework around the diamonds. And that framework is because I make the diamonds just a little bit smaller. I wanted to leave about 1/4 of an inch between diamonds, so we're going to take 1/8 of an inch off each edge of every diamond. And there's a really easy command to do that with. I just go up here to Edit, and there's a selection. It looks to me a little bit like a bobbin since I sew so much, but what this actually is making an offset line, and you can use that to make a seam allowance if you want to cut patches that you're going to sew together. You can also use it the way I'm going to, which means I'm going to set it for 0.12 inches. That's about 1/8 of an inch. And I want to go inward instead of outward. And I'm going to delete the original shapes when I'm finished. And I'm going to select bevel down here. All that does is leave my edges straight. And you may not see any difference, but these actually are now smaller. And I've got that here so that you can see the two outlines together. So now when I use these with my cutter, it's going to give me the diamonds that are a little bit smaller. And I can send this file now to my cutting machine. Actually, what I did was I duplicated so that I have several of them at one time. And I'm going to go into Pattern and Save Data. I have these saved already to go, so I can just show you quickly. And you may not be able to tell, but this is actually several of each of the 3 different shapes. And if I am doing this without the computer software, then you have a special mat that's used for scanning. And so this is just a printout of my computer file, and I can put that into the machine with the scanning function and have them directly on the cutter for me to use. But since I already have these in from the computer program, we are ready to cut as soon as I get the mat and load it. Now you'll notice this is a different mat. I'm not using the scanning mat. This one's actually for cutting, and I've mounted my fabric on. The fabric actually already has a fusible web product on the back so that it will be ready to fuse as soon as I get the cutting done. I have the cutting blade in my machine, and I've actually already done the test cut, which is always a good idea. You can imagine I've cut more than a few of these diamonds making the quilts, and I like to cut more than you actually need anyway because it gives you extra so you can play around with the color placement. So I load my mat, and then I'm going to tell the machine I want to cut and press start. And you'll want to cut a variety of pieces out of each color. I used 7 colors for my quilt, but you can go wild and use a whole rainbow, as many or as few as you like. But just be sure that you cut some of each of those diamond shapes so that you've got plenty of flexibility when you position them on your quilt. Okay, last diamond coming out of the cutter. And then I'm going to peel these off. And you can see that I get perfect little diamond shapes. I'll take time to get more of those off in a minute, but I have diamonds. I just peel off my backing, and then I'm ready to arrange them on my quilt. And to make sure that I don't overthink it, one of the things that I did was just sort of toss these onto the quilt. You won't get them exactly in your diamonds, but you'll be close, and then that gives you an idea of where you'd like to position them. One last tip I want to leave you with, be sure that you use a cotton batting for a project like this because we are going to be fusing those appliques into place before we stitch them, and you want to be sure that the heat of your iron doesn't compress or melt your batting. So back to my lovely quilt. I like it. I hope you do too. It looks like confetti and makes me happy, and it was kind of an interesting process to start from the end and work to the beginning.